Welcome to the Hero Hatchery Massive Open Online Training. I'm Amanda Ravenhill. This is Ryan Kushner. Lauren Wood is an organizer with Peaceful Uprising, which is a Utah-based climate justice organization. And our guest this evening is Professor Maggie Winslow, who is faculty and program manager for the Master of Science in Environmental Management program here in San Francisco at the University of San Francisco.
So let's start just by talking about Econ 101. So about 1 million U.S. college students take Econ 101, and they're taught a model that is really not correct. And it leads to misperceptions about the world that have serious consequences and which have repercussions for our attitudes towards environmental sustainability. The whole economy is within the ecosystem. So what we really should have is this diagram from Ecological Economics, which shows the economic system is actually embedded within the ecosystem. Because this is a closed system, it's actually subject to the laws of thermodynamics, which are true laws. They're not economic laws. They are actual, true physical laws in this universe as far as we know. How do we have a vibrant economy and still protect the environment, which we can definitely do? The whole jobs versus the environment debate is such a false dichotomy. Consumers, we have discovered, are irrational. They don't always spend their money on things that make them happier. In fact, often they spend money on things that make them less happy. Externalities and public goods are not included. So externalities are positive and negative things that happen outside of a market transaction. So for example, if I buy a packet of bacon, there's a hog farm that produced the bacon, and there's me that bought the bacon, and I paid money for it, so we had this transaction. But there's also maybe pollution coming from that hog farm, polluting downstream, and those people weren't involved in that transaction at all, but they have a negative outcome from it. Or you can have a positive externality where someone pays for an education, someone's paid to provide an education, but everyone is better off because of that person being more educated. Ecosystem services are services that the ecosystem provides to humans for free, like wetlands will purify water and replenish aquifers for free. There's the nitrogen cycle, the hydrogen cycle, the water cycle, the phosphorus cycle, and a really big and very important ecosystem service that we're messing with is climate stability. Right? We have, our oceans and forests, and everything is set up so that we keep the right level of gases in our atmosphere so that we have climate stability. But we're now messing with that. So natural capital is what the foundations for wealth that nature provides for us. So if our economic growth is faster than that, we shouldn't be calling it income. And right now, we do call it income. If you cut down a forest, if you over-harvest a field, if you create a factory that's polluting a waterway, but the factory is making money, and even if you spend money cleaning up the waterway, that all is part of our national income or our GDP. We see that as a positive thing, when actually, ultimately, we're getting poorer. If you had a company that sold off its machines and called that income, that would be a problem. But we're doing that. We're selling off our natural capital. We're degrading our natural capital, and we're allowing that to be called income. But it's not. And these natural limits are just not part of the economics curriculum right now. You get this if you take an environmental studies class, but no one is learning this in economics, so people still think, okay, the market can solve our problems because they don't understand these limits. Now, before we discovered fossil fuels, what we had for energy was human power, animal power, mostly horses, mules. And then we could burn some wood, but it was pretty heavy. It was cutting down the trees and carrying it around. That wasn't a very efficient way to do things. Mm-hmm. So work was limited. It was quite limited. And then we discovered fossil fuels, and all of a sudden you had this really dense power form that could do a lot of work. So it started with coal and then oil, gas. That allowed us to have an incredible amount of growth, which hasn't been all a bad thing. We've had huge technological innovations. We don't have to have everyone being a farmer anymore. And I could really go off on the fact that we've had this incredible increase in labor productivity, and people are working still as many hours as they used to. sort of thought it would be. In the 70s, people thought the crisis was going to be that people would only need to work 1 hour a week to meet all their needs. But that hasn't happened, because instead we've decided to concentrate wealth in the hands of the few. But we've had this massive growth due to fossil fuels. The only problem is, for one, we're going to run out of fossil fuels. And for two, before that happens, we can't burn them anyhow, or we're going to burn ourselves up. Environmental issues are social justice issues. When there's environmental degradation, the people who suffer most from it are people who live off the land, who are poor, who really depend on natural resources, who don't have other options for where they can go. So when we talk about pollution or resource degradation, so many of those issues have to do with equity, because if you're poor, you often don't have other options than drinking your tap water. I think with the climate too, if you look at where the worst impacts from climate change are going to occur, a lot of it is in developing countries. So, well, a lot of wealthier countries are creating the problem, but it's a lot of poorer countries that are really going to suffer from it.
I am really interested in how do we take this really honest and comprehensive analysis of the economy and move it into implementation that does it justice?
Well, there's a few initiatives that I think are really important. So one is trying to take the value of natural capital and include it in national measures of income, so including it in GDP.
My kind of takeaway from this presentation is that this new way of valuing ecosystems and humans and this holistic approach is clearly way more comprehensive and successful at bringing us a just future than we currently have. But that the real decision will be made by how it's implemented and regulated, like you're saying here. That development and implementation of the regulatory policies seems to be where I, as an activist, am most excited to go and do work on looking at what it actually means to hold the people in power accountable to make these changes happen.
Yeah. Reflected in this society, and so I'm on a mission far from